Good afternoon. Live from the Google Fiber Space in downtown Austin, Texas. This is a special virtual conversation on the City of Austin's mobility priorities. Hello, welcome to the Fiber Space and to this conversation. My name is Larry Schooler and I manage the Public Engagement Division at the City of Austin. We've got guests joining us from around the city today to discuss what our mobility priorities should be as this year of mobility continues here in 2016. So we're excited to get perspectives from all over Austin about what those priorities should be. I want to let you know that we are doing this in conjunction with a program called Conversation Corps. Conversation Corps is a partnership with the City of Austin, Austin Independent School District, Capital Metro, and Leadership Austin. And the mission of Conversation Corps is to engage the people of Austin in meaningful civic dialogue focused on public issues, hosted by facilitators across the entire city. Our vision is to make conversation and engagement easy and comfortable for everyone, and that's part of what we're illustrating today. We have folks joining us from around the city from the comforts of their own homes and offices in order to participate, so it really helps to expand the reach that we have in engaging the Austin community. The way that our conversation format works is that we have everyone introduce themselves. Then each person in turn, in a round-robin format, gets to share some initial thoughts uninterrupted, and then we begin more of a free dialogue round where folks can respond to things that they've heard or raise additional points, and then we try to summarize 3 to 5 themes from the conversation to provide as feedback to decision makers. So you can learn more about Conversation Corps, find a conversation near you, and train to become a facilitator by visiting conversationcorps.org. Or if you're interested in more detail on this topic, we'll be providing some, of course, today, but if you'd like to learn more, you can visit mobilitytalks.org. We also want to welcome everyone who is watching us live on YouTube today, and this is our first Google Hangout conversation. And of course, we want to acknowledge Sarah Zimmerman and the rest of the team here at the Fiber Space for doing such a great job of getting us on air on this really great platform. So before we introduce all of the participants, it's my great pleasure to be sitting next to District 5 Council Member Ann Kitchen, who's kind of a co-host with me today. Welcome, and we'd love to just hear some initial thoughts from you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you, all of you, for participating. I'm looking forward to the conversation. As you all know, this conversation, as we're dubbing it, Mobility Talks, it came as a result of a resolution that the council passed back in January or February, I forget now. But and what we did as part of that resolution, we asked you all, the city manager and Conversation Corps and the city staff, to help us get feedback from the public on what are your priorities about transportation. And you know, this is just one chapter in our transportation story. I mean, our staff is continuing with some major transportation planning efforts, which will take a few years. For example, working on updating our strategic mobility plan, which is a couple-of-year process. So in the meantime, we want to know, what should we be doing now? And so we're asking for the public to help us prioritize. What should we prioritize in terms of our traffic issues right now? And so that's what this conversation is about. So these conversations that are happening all over the city, along with all the public input that's happened in the past about things like the bicycle master plan, the sidewalk plan, corridor studies, all that will come to us at council, and we're expecting to have a hearing in front of the Mobility Committee in June. I believe it's June 14th, and then we'll be talking about how do we initiate next and how do we look at funding.
Thank you very much, Council Member. And I think one of the most important aspects of this and all conversations, frankly, about mobility is hearing how people weigh trade-offs, because obviously for improvements such as increased transit or increased bicycle lanes or improvements to sidewalks, widening of sidewalks, or road improvements, something's got to give. We don't have a whole lot of land that we can take to, make more room for some of the mobility that we're trying to address.
Yeah, particularly since this is in the context of, the way I like to think about it, we can't all be in our cars in the same spot on the road at the same time. It's just physically impossible. And so from my perspective, it's a matter of choices. How do we balance those choices so that people can drive their car or they can ride their bike, or they can walk, they can take transit, maybe they'll take a car to go or a taxi or a TNC. So basically, so people have choices about how they get around, and we think about how we get around as a service rather than a piece of, rather than a hard infrastructure. It's a service so that we could get where we need when we need to be there and have options for doing that.
And also, of course, one of the trade-offs to consider is just the finite amount of resources the city has to pay for mobility improvements. So another piece of this is, if you had to choose one priority to focus on financing, what would that be? So a lot to talk about today. Let's get right to it. I'd like for folks to introduce themselves, and I'm going to call out folks by our council districts. And as you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit briefly about how you primarily get around now and how you'd prefer to get around. So for instance, I'm Larry Schooler. I live in District 9, and my primary way of getting around right now is in a carpool, and I prefer to be able to take transit a little bit more often. That's just an example of an answer that you could give. So we'll start out in District 1. I think Cynthia is our District 1 voice today. So Cynthia, and I should say we are joined primarily by some of our Conversation Core hosts who we're thrilled both to have today and have volunteering with us. So Cynthia, please go ahead.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Cynthia Blocker, and I drive my car to work every day. That is typically my preference. However, I have entertained the thought of taking the mass transit.
Thank you, Cynthia. And from District 2, I think Alicia's with us.
Yeah, sorry, I had to unmute. My name is Alicia Larkins. I'm a resident of District 2. I'm the Director of Communications with a local nonprofit economic development firm called Business Community Lenders of Texas. And I'm not a Conversation Core host. I've attended some, but a lot of my input is coming from community meetings with residents and block walking, things like that. Oh, and I'm sorry. The way that I traditionally get around is by car. I do try to bike as much as possible, and would prefer to take more mass transit.
Thanks very much, Alicia. We have a little bit of a hybrid for District 3 and 4. Cruz has joined us today, and he often, I think, hosts in District 4 but lives in District 3. Cruz, do I have that right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, you do. So my name's Cruz Correa, and I work with CASA of Travis County. I'm the volunteer recruitment manager here, and I mainly get around in my car as well. I have done, there's been lots of times where I want to consider mass transit, like the train, the bus, even riding my bike. And one of the things that I've found is economically, there's no incentive for me to take the bus or the train. It's not cheaper than driving my car. And in terms of time, if I take the bus, I can get through traffic in 45 minutes. If I take the bus, it's about an hour. So there's not a lot of incentive at this point.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Let's move to District 5, and I think we have Dave Floyd with us today.
Hi, I'm Dave Floyd. I'm a lawyer and I co-own a real estate brokerage. I primarily get around by car. I have an office downtown that we use on an as-needed basis if we have meetings, but do a lot of work out of my house, and when I do travel for work, it's often the places all over town or out to Westlake, and that's just the most convenient way for me to get around. On my personal time, I use my bike and I use ride-sharing TNCs as well to get around.
Thanks. Yeah, transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft, and we should say that the mayor recently shared his goal of having folks telecommute en masse in a couple of weeks' time. So even though it may seem like immobility, in some ways it could help address some mobility challenges on that particular day if folks choose to forego driving somewhere. Thanks very much, Dave. District 6, who do we have? Do we have Bill? Welcome.
Hello. My name is Bill Gardner. I'm a leadership and executive coach. And most of the way I get to work is right down my hallway and sit in this chair because I'm coaching to people primarily via video coaching or audio coaching. When I'm not doing that, I'm commuting to the airport, and I do that by car. occasionally I have meetings downtown with potential clients, and I do use my car because I live in a place that commuting into town, it takes either 620, well, it takes 620, 183, 2222, or a MOPAC. I avoid rush hour at all costs. I try to refuse to meet anywhere downtown during rush hour or bringing a rush hour coming home. I would much prefer mass transit. I'll be going to New Jersey next week and taking the train from the airport to the hotel and back, and I would much prefer to have that option available. Here.
That's great input. Thank you very much, Bill. I just wanted to mention also that what's called Austin Don't Rush, which is the day the mayor wanted for folks to try to telecommute, is May 11th, which I think is 2 weeks from yesterday. So something to keep in mind. All right, let's see. I don't think we have a District 7 or 8 representative, but we do have District 9 in the form of Julie Smith, the head of Conversation Corps.
Awesome. Thank you, Larry. Julie Smith. I work and live in District 9. As Larry mentioned earlier, I'm not used to sitting in this seat. I usually sit in his and facilitate conversations or completely behind the scenes. So it's fun to be here today and to get to be a part of the conversation. I live about 3 miles from my office, which can take, in bad times of day, as many as 45 minutes or so.
Wow.
So yes, I spend a lot of time in my car, more so than I like, and would love to be able to use public transportation.
Thanks very much. Tinny is on the line, and I know that you technically live outside the city limits, but you do a lot in District 10. So we're very glad to have you today. If you'd like to introduce yourself, I think you might be on mute. Actually, we can't hear you. Can you unmute your microphone?
That's it. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Hi, Larry. Thank you. My name is Tini Vijaya, and I'm one of the hosts for Conversation Core, working closely with Julie and the rest of our team. I live in a Bee Cave, Lakeway area, and I do travel a little bit to downtown, but very little. Right now, I travel mostly by car where I am. I'm a full-time housewife, so I work from home, so don't need that much, to travel down to downtown. But if I do, I prefer ride sharing. So I use Uber quite a bit, and I think that's good. And I just moved from Austin, from Singapore, which has a very, very good public mass transit. So would like to see how that works out in Austin, seeing that it's grown a lot in the last few years that I've been living here. So yeah, curious to see how that can pan out.
Well, thanks. Welcome to Austin, I guess I should say. That's quite a move, and
yes.
Hope you're enjoying it. Councilmember, we did introduce you, but perhaps is there anything you'd like to share about your current and desired future mobility habits?
Well, like everyone who talked, I use my car quite a bit. I do live relatively close to the center of town, and so, but of course, travel throughout the district, and so I use my car more than I would like. I do ride my bicycle, I do walk, I do take the bus. And I'd like to use those options more.
Gotcha. Well, seems fairly common amongst our participants today to say that driving their own car is common, and they'd love to diversify that mix a little bit. Though I appreciated what Cruz had to say about the willingness to diversify if there's some incentive to kind of level off the playing field between time and effort involved in driving yourself versus riding transit. So that's very helpful input. All right, let me get into the first little bit of discussion here. As I mentioned, we wanted to talk about specific mobility priorities. And so the city has actually identified 4 priority categories for transportation improvements. And I'm going to read them and then explain a little bit more about what they mean. 1 is manage congestion. 2 is improve safety. 3 is improve connections in my neighborhood. And 4 is improve the quality of my streets. So managing congestion basically means managing travel demand at peak hours and strengthening transportation network connections, as well as multiple mobility choices that ease congestion. So this could include improvements to intersections, streets, signals, bikes, and transit infrastructure. For improving safety, that means enhancing safe travel for all users regardless of mode of travel by constructing improvements that promote use by people of all ages and abilities. So that could mean improvements to crosswalks, sidewalk and bicycle networks, and traffic calming devices that slow down vehicles. improving connections in my neighborhood means local improvements to street, transit, bicycle, and sidewalk networks in the neighborhood that provide connections to schools, grocery stores, and neighborhood amenities and the like. Improvements can include creating more connections, filling in gaps in those networks, and adding new streets. And for improving the quality of my streets, that means improving the current condition of existing streets, bridges, sidewalks, and bicycle facilities. And those enhancements could include installing new street trees, benches, bicycle racks, and other amenities. So the question we'd like to pose to everyone in turn, and we'll have each person kind of answer individually without folks jumping in, is of those four, what would you most like to see the city address with transportation improvements, and why? So of the four, manage congestion, improve safety, improve connections in my neighborhood, and improve quality of my streets, what would you most like to see the city address with transportation improvements, and why? So I'm going to start with Cynthia in District 1. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are quality of streets in the district, specifically Johnny Morris. I was born and raised in Austin. There was a time when Johnny Morris was a daunting street. It was 2 lanes, there was overgrown bush, and that was, I guess, high crime area. You just would not want to travel there. However, now that's no longer the case. It is a shortcut. It's a thoroughfare when 183 South is congested, and Johnny Morris can bring you all the way from 290 to 969 and give you an option to go back to 21 towards Bastrop or 71 to connect going South Austin to 35. However, Johnny Morris is still a very 2-lane rough road. No sidewalks. There are elementary schools and middle schools there along Johnny Morris, and the kids don't have a safe walking conditions going to and from the bus or to and from school.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. I'm going to go to Alicia next with her thoughts on priorities.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was having connection troubles, so hopefully,
No trouble.
hopefully this will work. So our district, District 2, is very diverse with very diverse needs, and a lot of what we have heard revolves around all kinds of needs relating to mobility. So safety concerns with high traffic areas. There is congestion concerns. There are concerns about safe routes to school. Definitely concerns about safe biking routes. There are certain areas that need sidewalk connectivity or sidewalk repair, and there have been requests for additional bus stops close to some of the community amenities, and also making those bus stops more friendly for elderly and disabled folks who maybe need shelter at the bus stops or benches, things like that. So we have quite a list of priorities within our district that could really help people get around more safely and more effectively.
Thanks, Alicia. And I'm going to move to Cruz, maybe sharing some perspective on both District 3 and 4, or maybe just his home district of 3. Cruz, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. If I were to personally choose, I'd say we'd have to go with manage congestion first, and then improve connections in my neighborhood. Specifically, because when you're talking about managing congestion, you're really talking about an all-encompassing kind of approach. The safety part of it is kind of one of those things where I think it's implicit. I mean, safety should never be, not a part of the conversation or not a part of any plan. So I don't even really know why that's one of the options. But managing congestion and getting connections between in your neighborhoods, because it's you have different areas where you need connections within the area, and then you have managing congestions where if you need to go to another part of town, that's going to take care of that. So those would be my two right now.
Thanks, Cruz. Dave in District 5?
Okay, well, as a host, I've heard managing congestion and improved connections come up the most. But for me personally, it's managing congestion. You know, I live right by South Lamar. That it backs up in the mornings, it backs up in the afternoons. It makes it very difficult to get anywhere. Generally throughout the city, MOPAC used to be predictable. You know, you'd know if you drove up north before 4 o'clock, you'd probably be fine. Now it's a crapshoot. I may go up at like 1 o'clock to go up north to do something, and there's a traffic jam. It's really bad. And you know, coming back to my area, we've got South Lamar, we've got different intersections, Barton Springs and Lamar, and then I think actually over in District 9, the 5th and Lamar intersection, the slowness there and the mix of pedestrian and car traffic does cause backups all the way down into, you know, up to Manchac. Well, not to Manchac, maybe in the morning, but up to Oltorf in the afternoons. Anyway, yeah, so I want to follow up with what Mr. Cruz said and say that I think this comes back to looking at a mix of transit alternatives. What can we do to get people into buses, or to have more effective ride sharing, or to have, you know, real usable bike lanes, something where the car doesn't have to be the first option, and doesn't have to be the most convenient option, and you can really get more folks moving on. You can condense the amount of people moving on the same roadway and try to get the flow moving faster.
Thanks very much, David. Appreciate also you sharing some of what you've heard as a host to kind of expand our base of information here from the public. That's great. I think we're ready for Bill in District 6.
This is probably the easiest question I've ever been asked, congestion. When I leave here to go toward Austin proper, as I refer to it, I've got Anderson Mill as a choice, 183 as a choice, 620, and 2222 as my choices. So if I have to do that in rush hour, I use either Google Maps or a Waze app. But this week when I had to be in town at 8 o'clock for a meeting, I got out of the shower and I was already getting an announcement that I needed to leave then to make it, because the time had been stretching out from the congestion. On 620 at the 4 Points intersection, I sat through 6 lights at that intersection just to turn left on 2222 and then get bogged down again. So, you know, my neighborhood is a new neighborhood. The streets are in pretty good shape. It'd be great to have mass transit. I think if mass transit were here, a lot of people would jump on it, even if it wasn't convenient times and things like that, to avoid driving in that crazy congested traffic on these thoroughfares.
Right. Thanks very much, Bill. Let me go to Julie, and then we'll finish up with Tinny.
I'm going to echo a lot of what Cruz and Dave were saying in terms of just the interrelatedness of the connections within your neighborhood and congestion. I have a hard time separating those. I think when I think what does this city need, congestion absolutely needs to be addressed immediately, and I think that the neighborhood connections are such a huge piece of that. If we could get around easier within our own neighborhoods, that's a huge part of the overall congestion. So I think in my mind I have a little hard time separating those, but if I had to, I'd definitely place congestion by far at the top of the list. I know with me being working downtown and living close to town, if I could stay out of my car, you know, you don't even have to get me to town, I'm already there. But even keeping me out of my car within downtown would be significant, and that would just take some, I know, large changes, but just within my neighborhood.
Tinny, to close out this round, what are your thoughts?
I think like Julie, I echo what Dave Cruz said as well, and that's the theme seems to be that we found during our conversation this month in District 10 with a few participants. The priority is congestion and then managing that connection, and those two are related. And for me, living here in Bee Cave Lakeway, congestion is not as much, so moving around where we are in our little town here in Bee Cave Lakeway. However, I do see that as the town grows, well, the small businesses around here would require people to actually do the reverse commute, if any. Coming from all areas of Austin to come down to Bee Cave Lakeway to support the businesses here, and I found a lot of businesses here have problem finding people. Number one, to want to drive all the way, that 45 minutes an hour to come to our area to work, basically, and I think even if, let's say, that happens, that means a lot of cars, more and more cars will be coming down to our way, and that will add congestion. So it'd be great if you have that connection through, some sort of public transit that makes sense, right? In terms of cost, in terms of accessibility, but that's my thought.
Thank you so much, Tinny. I think it's interesting, Councilmember, as we listen to all these responses. At the beginning, Cynthia and Alicia seemed to be making reference to just very clear and present safety-related needs and sort of maintenance of existing infrastructure. And then as we got through to other districts, we started talking a little bit more about congestion and improving connections within sort of emerging and growing neighborhoods. What else did you take from that kind of first round of impressions from the group?
Well, I think everyone is recognizing and talking about the interrelatedness of all these issues, and talking about congestion in a way. What I'm hearing is that talking about congestion in a way that leads to more choices for people, so they don't have to be on the road at the same time during rush hour. Although I think I did hear at least one person talk about how rush hour seems to be extending, at least along Mopac at certain times. So that was very good feedback.
It seems to extend earlier and earlier. I'm not sure if it goes as late, but you can get on the freeway. I've had doctor's appointments in Northwest Austin, get on at 3 and be stuck, which is very interesting.
Well, the other thing I noted was as you said, which I think is important, that in some parts of town that basic infrastructure is perhaps lagging behind more than in other parts of town, and that's something that we need to pay attention to. Also, I think there was a recognition that the connections in the neighborhood actually can work. If we can improve those connections, like to schools, for example, or to bus stops, then we can help alleviate congestion, because those connections are critical for people having options.
Yeah, I certainly live in a neighborhood where we're getting more and more opportunities to eat out within walking distance, but unless you have really nice sidewalk infrastructure and a feeling of safety with lighting and so on, then you may still drive that short distance or use some other means. So that's certainly a critical factor. So at this point, what we're going to do is open up the conversation a little bit. I'm not going to go in sequence like I did before. Since we're on Google Hangout, we have to still try to speak one at a time. But I'm going to open the floor here in just a minute, and anybody who'd like to respond can, and we can kind of continue, and I'll interject only to sort of ask follow-up questions or kind of keep us on track. But this is a little bit more of a flexible round of discussion. So the couple of things that I would encourage you all to think about in this round would be sort of, what have you heard from others that you'd like to respond to one way or the other? But I also want to ask you about what trade-offs you'd be willing to accept. For instance, would you be willing to reduce the amount of time you drove alone if you had more options to get to your destination, like transit, walking, or bicycling? And what sorts of improvements would you actually be willing to spend more of your own money on, whether it be in taxes or fees, and why? Or what sorts of modes or improvements would you rather not spend more of your money on, and why not? So modes like biking, carpooling, driving alone, bus, rail, walking, using a motorcycle, taxis, Uber and Lyft, and other ground transportation, as well as car sharing like Car2Go and Zipcar. What of those would you like to actually spend more money on to improve them, as opposed to just what we can manage within our existing budget? So the floor is basically open. We do need to make sure we don't overlap, so if I need to, I may call upon folks for that. And Councilmember, maybe you want to make some thoughts?
I just wanted to add to the mix. I think it's inherent in what you were asking about. But when you're thinking about trade-offs, if you could also think about what it would take for you to make that trade-off. I think we had some conversation earlier about time is a factor in terms of choosing the bus. But if there's anything else if people would like to speak to that, or anything else in terms of identifying what would actually make it possible for them to not use their car.
Yeah, I mean, I for one always am checking to see how much of a discrepancy there is between driving and taking transit. I wanted to just quickly observe, Bill was mentioning New Jersey, and I was in New York City recently and had gotten on the subway and realized a little too late I was on the wrong subway. So I jumped out, grabbed a taxi, and I'm convinced that it took longer in a taxi than on foot. So there certainly are places in the country where there is an incentive in that respect. But the floor is open. Whoever would like to join the conversation next may do so. Just unmute your mic and go ahead.
So I want to.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Go for it. Go for it.
Sorry. So I just wanted to jump in. It is difficult to prioritize these things because everybody has a personal opinion on it. But yeah, back to your earlier point, you can't really address congestion without addressing the other issues because they are all interrelated. I just feel like and I would be willing to spend more on most alternative transportation options, personally speaking. But I do feel like some of them give a bigger bang for the buck, and when it comes to things like mass transit, those are big ticket items that are difficult to get everybody on the same page for. But when it comes to things like bike lanes, you can do a lot with a lot less money in that regard. So for me, it comes down to things like that. How to, if we could increase the frequency of the bus routes, bus stops, and do things, take some small steps that can have some big impacts. I think that's how I sort of prioritize it.
And on the bike lanes specifically, Alicia, would you, for instance, be open to either removing some on-street parking or even removing a lane of through traffic to accommodate new bike lanes?
I would. I personally would. I feel like the not only the mobility trade-offs, but also the health benefits are huge for the community, and just to have that as an extra option for people could have significant positive outcomes. So I do feel like it's worth some of the trade-offs.
Appreciate that. Before I go to Cruz, just curious if anybody else has thoughts specific to bicycling, because we certainly have this bike master plan, which is not fully implemented. We have a lot of folks who I know want to see improvements made to it, but there are associated trade-offs. So any other thoughts from anyone associated with potentially improvements to bicycle infrastructure?
Well, yeah, I love bicycling, and I do it for fun, and I do it for personal errands, but the problem you have with bicycling if you're going to work in a professional environment is that it's very hot here most of the year, half the year, and it's hilly. You're going to work up a sweat, you're going to look terrible, so you need to have businesses on board with having showers and changing facilities. You need to have good bike storage facilities. I don't necessarily want to leave a $1,000 bike out in front of a building on the street all day with bike thieves around. I'd like to be able to keep it inside, keep it somewhere safe. And also, as much as I enjoy riding around, if I have meetings all over town or even all over the central city, it's just not a realistic option.
One of Councilmember Kitchen's, well, I guess you didn't serve at the same time, but a council predecessor of Councilmember Kitchen's, Councilmember Riley, was I believe almost exclusively a bicycle commuter. Maybe he took the bus sometimes, put the bike on the bus, but interesting to see how viable that is to the rest of the population, I suppose.
Well, he also had other options. We as council members, we do have some options to catch a ride when we need to, and we do that, from City Hall. So so I hear what Dave is saying. I've also found that the B-cycles can be helpful, at least for shorter-term trips with regard to where you leave your bike. Now, it's that network is improving in terms of where it's located. It's still not broad enough for a lot of us to use it exclusively. Plus, it's not necessarily as comfortable a ride. So, but in terms of where you park your vehicle, and it also might be interesting. This is just as an aside, and not anything that's going to change anytime soon. But being in a hot climate like we are, it'd be interesting that perhaps we ought to be rethinking whether we have to wear suits and ties.
Well, now that sounds like a policy I could get behind as I sort of start baking in this near the sunlight. But you know, it's interesting what Dave said about showers, because at City Hall we are fortunate to have showers in the building, and also there are some local businesses here in downtown that provide that service. It'd be interesting to see whether the city could invest in that kind of infrastructure, separate from lanes, which are important perhaps, but just having, you know, sort of ubiquitous shower facilities.
Yeah, and I think that's a good idea, one that we haven't talked about enough. Because when we talk about bike infrastructure, we tend to talk about how we ride on the streets and cycle tracks and those sort of things, not addressing the rest of the infrastructure that's necessary to make it possible for people.
And I think everybody knows this, but B-Cycle is a locally available nonprofit-run bike sharing program where you can check out a bike and either park it at your destination and then bring it back, or park it at another B-Cycle station. And they have a great mobile app and website to show you where to get them. Let me go to Cruz, because I know you'd been wanting to get in towards the beginning of the conversation and hear your thoughts.
So I actually wanted to bring up an issue that kind of Bill alluded to, is traffic lights and how many of them. Well, let me back up a little bit. It's not that there's a whole lot of them. You know, they're necessary, obviously, because we're at cross streets. But I think what I've seen is sometimes they just don't make any sense. You know, the red light, green light, red light, green light. It just doesn't make sense. I've read an article a while back that talked about just fixing that alone could shave minutes. You know, I'm talking about 5-10 minutes just going from, let's say, one side of, you know, from 35 to Mopac having to go through downtown on Cesar Chavez, or on Pleasant Valley, where on, you know, off of you know, those places get congested. And what I've seen is, you know, they don't make any sense, and I don't understand why we haven't. You know,
and when you say they don't make any sense, do you mean the timing
like
associated with the red and the green? Is that what you meant?
I'm sorry, say that again.
When you say they don't make sense, is it primarily the timing of the lights in terms of either in relation to one another or how long they stay red and green?
Yes, both exactly. Both of the what you mentioned is what I'm talking about in relation to the red and green at peak times, and then the time as well that they are red and green. You know, and I think if there was a study around that in Austin, I would imagine, and I'd probably put a little money on it, and bet that it's inefficient.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, and I would say the same. I've seen places that don't make sense to me. I can tell you that there's a real art and science to the timing, and there are studies out there of Austin, and they're in our transportation. And not being a transportation engineer, I'm certainly not going to try to explain because I don't know all the details. But I do know that our staff has been working to work on those improvements, because I think you're right that that's an area that we can improve traffic flow. So we've done things like the council has authorized additional dollars for smart intersections, which have ways to improve the traffic flow. We also have a center, a traffic control center, that is involved in working to improve the traffic flow. So I'm happy to get more information out there, because that is a key thing. But I do want you to know that there's a lot of activity happening around there. Obviously, there's improvements that need to be made, but there's a lot of activity happening around improving traffic flow. And one thing, just real quickly, is mentioning the traffic for buses. So we recently passed a resolution to move forward with the transit priorities. And that includes, you've seen them in a couple places around town, but the intersection improvements that allow buses to pull out ahead of the cars in a few circumstances, and those are carefully timed, and it's a separate set of lights for the buses. So that's beginning to happen in a few places around town.
Well, and I think another piece of the transit discussion worth having is, you know, to what extent do we think there should be a priority placed on lanes that are reserved for transit, which you see downtown, but you tend not to see once you get sort of north of MLK. And as somebody who goes up to the university fairly often, you know, you really have to be strategic on Guadalupe, because you don't know whether you'll be stuck for an extended period of time, what with those very popular bus stops. Other thought, it looks like Bill maybe wanted to chime in. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it feels like to me that every time we have this conversation in Austin, we talk about incremental solutions. Let's do a little here, let's do a little there, and let's not cause anybody to pay more taxes or more fees or anything like that. And the reality feels like to me, Austin is not growing incrementally. I mean, we have an astronomical growth rate. I moved here in the early 80s. People were already complaining about traffic, and it has certainly not gotten better. So I guess I'm wondering, at what point will the pain get great enough that we as citizens will say, you know what, we can't have great transit without paying some money for it. I mean, I don't know where that money comes from, but it's going to cost money to fix this problem. I don't think we're going to get there by little incremental steps here and there. I think we have to have a big long-term vision and get businesses on board to say, yeah, let's support bonds or whatever it is we need to do to raise the money to do something for Austin 10 years from now, 20 years from now, instead of go back 15 years and fix it for that where we want now.
Right. I think it's very interesting to sort of hear a little bit of a contrast between Alicia's points earlier and yours, only in the sense that, Alicia made reference to the complexity associated with, large-scale investment in transit in terms of gaining popular support. We obviously had a failed referendum in 2014 around rail, although there is a regional vision known as All Systems Go that is out there, but yet to be fully acted upon. I'd just be curious, Tinny, if you would be open to maybe sharing a little bit about the Singapore experience, because I know that Singapore and many other cities around the world have these extremely extensive, built-out transit systems, and maybe some of your experience with that, if you'd like to share.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that it does take money. It's a huge project, in terms of building it, time, and then maintaining it as well. But yes, definitely the benefit is greater than the pain. Let's put it that way. And being a newcomer to Austin, yes, I can see in the last 2-3 years, seems like it's a patchwork, solution, rather than it's a long-term sustainable solution. And again, taking my experience the last 2-3 years living out here in Bee Cave, which is sort of like the suburb of Greater Austin, it does help to get that accessibility to us, having that public transport come in here, be it rail, be it bus, I think that would greatly help.
Thank you very much, Tinny. Cynthia, I don't know that I've heard from you yet in this round, so just wanted to let you have the opportunity.
Well, thank you. What comes to my mind immediately is the new improvement of the 183 North, the Bergstrom Express, that's going to take everyone from Leander to the airport almost immediately. As we go through that transition, I would like to see some creativity done in regards to the timing of the lights. I work at Duval, North Austin, at Apple, and I travel to St. Edward's to classes immediately after work, and it's taking me 1 hour and 15 minutes. However, now that 183 is going to 2 lanes as we go through that transition of improvement, which is we're all excited about, I would like to see some creativity in the timing of the lights and even the diversion of the traffic.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and that kind of gets back to the point that we've been kind of dancing around, which is what are you willing to spend more money on as it relates to mobility improvements? Because if I'm not mistaken, Bergstrom Expressway is going to be tolled, at least the main lanes there, the highway lanes will be, and of course we're going to see some express lanes on Mopac that will come with some tolling, and so that sort of raises a question in my mind as to whether that in particular is something folks feel comfortable spending more money on as we go forward, or should the money go elsewhere. I also haven't heard from you this round. You kind of hide over there to my left, to my peripheral vision, but any thoughts from you?
Hey, Larry, before Julie starts,
sure.
I need to drop off.
Oh, that's totally fine. We knew you had a prior
Okay.
engagement. Thanks so much
Okay.
for being with
All
us.
right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Goodbye. Each have a good day.
Julie, go ahead.
I think the thing that's standing out most to me are Bill's comments in terms of how do we fund this? As we hear, we all agree something needs to be done, and we're so, I hate to use the word divided, but divided on how to make it happen and whether we're willing personally to invest in this. And I don't know the answers. I just know that I get frustrated being out in the community hearing people say, well, they need to do this and they need to do this. And how do we, beyond conversation core, help people understand that it's not they, it's we, and what are we going to do? And it's going to take dollars.
And let me briefly come back to Cruz if I can. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember, did you want to?
I just wanted to say it's going to take dollars, and it's also going to take each of us thinking about how we get around. So it may take dollars. It also may take a change in behavior when the options are available, of course. I mean, that's what the May 11th is about. And, we could do a lot about congestion if we were able to adjust the times that we're on the road. So that's certainly not going to solve everything, but it's something to think about. So I like your point about what are we going to do, because every person has choices that they make.
Thanks very much. I actually might want to direct this question to Cruz and maybe to Dave, but in Cruz's case, you mentioned at the very beginning that you feel like there ought to be some sort of an incentive to lead you to do something other than driving, and I'm curious what that would be for you. What are your thoughts around how that could be incentivized to go from driving your own car to doing something else?
So, for me, it's it's time versus money, and that's when I think about taking mass transit, I think about obviously the bus and the dart or the train, and when I put the budget on paper, and I'm trying to decide, am I gonna take my car, or if I'm gonna take this train, because it'd be awesome to take the train. It's fast. It takes me where I need to go, but it's gonna cost me more than what it would cost me if I were to just put gas in my car and take my car. And
so you're saying that when you aggregate up the costs of driving, and for me that looks like the fuel, but it also looks like insurance, and obviously, if you're not haven't paid off the car payments, you're saying you would come out behind, you'd come out ahead financially driving, even in that case, over the rail fares?
Well, I'm not going to put in insurance and a car payment into that budget. That doesn't make any sense for me, because I'm going to need a car, regardless of whether I use it every day or I don't use it every day. If I want to get around in Austin, this is just not work or just personal. If I want to go to Dallas, if I want to go to San Antonio, I'm going to need my own car. And I think here in Texas, we have been the culture of having a car, and you want to get around, you want to be able to personally move around past beyond Austin. I'm going to need a car, so I don't include my insurance and car payment in that. I'm talking about a budget where strictly on gas, literally, and time, and it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense to take a train when it's cheaper for me to just use my car.
Right.
Had gas been $3 a gallon, completely different story.
Yeah.
But we're not at $3 a gallon.
That's correct. Councilmember, did you have a comment?
Oh, and that's part of this conversation is the trade-offs, and so trade-offs of cost. It's not just cost; it's also preferences or convenience and time. The cost of time, because the cost of your car does include your insurance and buying the car and all that,
and maintaining it.
But what I'm hearing said, which makes sense, is that there's also the value of time. So if you were able to do without a car, you still need to get places that require something like a car. So how do you do that? And can you do it in a way that makes sense financially, and also is not just a financial question, it's a convenience question.
Right.
So if you have your own car, you can and you need to go somewhere you need a car for, you could step out the door and use your car as opposed to a car to go or some other kind of service. So.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's
Larry,
interesting. Go ahead, Cruz, please.
I want to talk a little bit about the whole funding issue. And it's one of those things where I get it. Funding, we're going to need funding, and it's going to come from somewhere. Those are going to be hard decisions that we're going to have to make. It's going to happen, regardless of what we think right now and how we're going to go about this. My issue with all this is, we live in a city that's supposed to be innovation town. I mean, we are innovative. We are, entrepreneurs. This is what the city is pretty much built on. And so when we start talking about mobility, I want people to really think about that. What do we have right now? What's in place right now that we can make better, just with what we got? You got to make do with what we have. We're not. We already know this is a 30-year plan to really get this the way we want it to be. But when we talk about short term, we got to be innovative. One of the biggest things that I've noticed is that we have incentives for these large corporations to come into town, provide jobs, great pay, all the good stuff, right? I don't know if this is going on, but is there a part of that incentive? Are we telling these companies, hey, your start time has to be 6 a.m. or your start time has to be 9:30 or 10 o'clock?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, a lot of times these newer companies seem to, I don't want to overgeneralize, but there are a lot of companies that have opened up away from the urban core for one reason or another and aren't accessible via some of the other modes, and so that can contribute to some of the problems. I just wanted to make a quick observation about the point related to needing a car and sometimes going to other parts of the state. I teach part-time occasionally at SMU in Dallas, and it will take me longer on Megabus to get from the UT area to downtown Dallas to the actual campus than it would if I just drove directly. But that's 3 some hours that are a little bit more mine than the roads. I obviously can do other things, and so it's interesting how we evaluate sort of the benefits and drawbacks of different modes, because for me sometimes the time issue is something I'm willing to sacrifice if I can either get work done or just talk on the phone more easily or something like that. Looked like you were going to make a comment before.
Oh, I just thought it was an interesting comment about we do think of when people come to town, when companies come to town, and we ask them questions about the wages and how many jobs and things like that, but we don't ask them about the impact on transportation. So that's an interesting thought that I'd like to think about further.
Yeah. Well, so we typically have these conversations for 1 hour, and we're at 5 before the hour, so I would probably at this point be starting to summarize the key themes. But let me just quickly see if there's anybody that would like to make a shorter kind of additional comment before I do that wrap up. Anyone's welcome. Bill, looks like you'd like to. Go ahead.
Well, I've just been sitting here and a song was sort of going through my head, so I thought, what is that song and why am I hearing it right now? It's Alison Krause's Everybody Wants to Go to Heaven, but Nobody Wants to Die. And I feel like that's kind of the theme here. We all want this outstanding transit system, quick here to there, and all that other good stuff, but we're not really willing to make sacrifices to make that happen. That's just what popped into my head.
Thanks very much. Any other quick additional comments from anybody? This right here is the quietest moment in my public engagement career. It was right now. But we're really happy that everybody was on. Let me see if I can try to put a quick summary on our conversation today. We certainly had a lot of energy from participants around the need to prioritize ways to manage congestion. We also, though, heard from some folks that some of the what I'll call more basic needs of our transportation system are really critical, at least in certain parts of town, like the refurbishment or addition of new sidewalks and care for some of the streets, particularly ones that have become so-called cut-through streets, and just kind of some of that more basic infrastructure needs to be attended to. We also talked about the potential for some smaller scale change that could have a major impact. For instance, installation of more shower facilities in more parts of town to help with the Austin climate and the bicycling mode of transportation. And then I feel like I heard a lot of willingness to consider both behavioral change and even a greater investment of money in order to get some of the deeper, more impactful improvements that may be associated with a larger scale transit system or sort of larger infrastructural changes that folks may see as necessary for us to get where we want to go, as well as paying tolls to drive on more of an expressway or highway than on a service road or a regular street. So that might seem like a lot mishmashed together, but maybe if by show of nods of the head, do you feel like I've sort of adequately summarized the conversation thematically today? Does that sound about right? Is there anything I'm missing? I'm seeing mostly nods of the head and thumbs up, so I'm going to take that as a good sign. Councilmember Kitchen, you've been listening this whole hour. Any closing reflections from you?
Well, I would just say that this process is really critical and so important for the council. And so in y'all's leadership roles in the community, I know you're already doing this, but if you'll continue to encourage people to participate in the conversation and also to fill, whether that be filling out the surveys for Mobility Talks or just going online and sending the information to your council member, we really, really want to hear from people. And that's going well, and we just encourage that to continue.
Yeah, I'm going to throw out another website, speakupaustin.org, where we're actually having a discussion, a threaded discussion about some of these topics. So the survey is one option for you, as well as a threaded discussion right on speakupaustin.org. For those who are watching, we appreciate you joining us and want to let you know if you'd like to be part of a conversation like this in the future, go to conversationcore.org and either sign up for a training to be a host. I think we have a training coming up on June the 3rd at Leadership Austin, and that training is less than half a day, and it's free of charge to anyone who signs up for that training. So we're looking to expand upon our core of 75 hosts, some of whom are with us today, and we really want to thank them for their service. And again, mobilitytalks.org is the hub site for this particular conversation, and as the council member mentioned, in early June, you said the 14th, I believe, is when we expect for the council to take this up more publicly. And so we encourage you either to attend that meeting, stream it online at atxn.tv, or just send in some comments ahead of that meeting so the council has as much information as they can from the community. I want to again say thanks to our friends at Google. Full disclosure, my wife does work here, but Sarah Zimmerman led up the effort to get us on the air live today, and we really, I'll turn around and look at her. We really appreciate that. We also want to thank Laura Foss from my office for helping with note-taking. She's not on screen, but she's right there. Julie Smith and her team at Conversation Corps for all that they do, and of course Councilmember Kitchen for taking valuable time away at her lunch hour to be part of this. So on behalf of the City of Austin and Google, which of course has its own mobility ideas, including those self-driving cars I see all over town, but on behalf of Google and the City of Austin, thanks for joining us. I'm Larry Schooler. Have a good rest of your day.